Hey guys, welcome to another session of RBTL, or Reading Between the Lines. This is the June 9th edition of the Balance Adjustment Preview. In this, we have DJB, Haste, Choux, Alencia, and then the likes. Of course, this is, as usual, this will be my thoughts on the entire balance patch. I'm not doing this right on the day of release though. This is a bit delayed. So I've obviously had perspectives from other people and what they think about it as well. But of course, I'm going to go with my version or my thought process. So first things first is DJB. So DJB, I think a lot of people are saying that, oh man, he's gonna be really OP right now into the barriers. We are seeing heroes that, you know, are really strong now, especially with barrier. Obviously FCC has been really strong. OpSig had generally been like a force ban if you drop someone like FCC or maybe even Huayang. But like DN right now in the meta, she is a predominant like high barrier hero, and this is really what gives the her full team like high survival cycles really fast. So like, does DJB have a place in that? Maybe, but again, I think assessing how his new skill Desert Storm works, it is still on a turn cooldown, so I think this forces DJB to be played in a very aggro comp. Perhaps a cleave type of hero, like in a cleave deck. I don't know if his new buffs make him usable in standard. What we call standard would be like bruisers, you know, having a knight, maybe a soul weaver here and there. I don't know if he'll fit into that as much, but I think time will tell. So the first things first is that on Desert Wind after, we do have the healing effect of his Everlasting Oasis basically tacked onto this. Now the only difference is that this heals all allies when the caster uses his skill. This used to heal on the S3 as well, and this seems to be removed on DJB right now. So he will no longer have healing on any other skill other than the S1. Now is that, I'm not quite sure, like, is that good or bad? Some people are saying it's a nerf. Obviously, you know, Smilegate will never use the term nerfing. But nerf is, I guess, is a subjective term as well, just based on what you found useful on the hero previously. So if you found the S3 was needed and for healing, then obviously it is a nerf in terms of the S3 itself. But regardless, it's technically the same thing now onto the S1, taking the old S2, tacking onto the S1. You still have the 35% chance to stun single target, but you recover the health of all allies. The recovery is the same. Healing is decreased. All right, so like, even though this is in green, the green and red is showing the before and after, but it just does feel like it's a nerf in terms of that usefulness, right? So this is why I'm thinking, like, he's no longer going to be really a soul weaver. He's going to be like in a very aggressive comp, perhaps even in a cleave deck, just to eat through barriers. So increasing the amount recovered if you soul burn it. This has attack all enemies, and I think there's pros and cons for both. I won't say anything more than that, but I mean, costing 20 souls to like for the amount recovered, I don't know if it's worth it. This would say that, you know, you want to soul burn this maybe in a standard draft, but then it costs 20 souls, which I don't know if that like increased amount is so good that really that 20 souls is that good, right? Like, so like a Destina soul burn, Ruel soul burn, we all know that those are actually really good. So like, is it the same amount? I'm not quite sure, but then he doesn't have the stats to survive like a Destina, to survive like a Ruel. I'm not quite sure about that one. And like a Desert Storm, so the after, right? So this is a new skill, brand new. With a Sandstorm, inflicts barrier inversion on all enemies and has an 85% chance to decrease hit chance for 2 turns. When the target is granted a barrier, grants an extra turn to the caster. And then barrier inversion, it explains inverts barrier into damage, unaffected by effect resistance, or whether the attack hits, so you can miss if you have a blind debuff or whatever, it doesn't matter. And then applies to heroes only, so you can't take advantage of that for like expos or any other PvE content that, you know, like Ancient Inheritance. I mean, those monsters can get like really fat barriers. You can't do that, but based on the reading here, inverting the barrier or barrier inversion is literally taking, like, let's say FCC has 3000 HP shield, it just makes it so that it just deletes it. You know, like on the pixel on the HP bar is usually like green and then the barrier is white. I'm assuming that white part just basically eats into the green, so you're basically just gonna take a 3000 HP barrier there. If anyone has higher HP, like let's say Peyra, like maybe he has a use there. I don't believe that this would I don't believe that this would like force Para out of the stealth, let's say for example. And then also based on this reading, when the target is granted a barrier, grants an extra turn to the caster. So it feels like, let's say in a Para case, if she's the only barrier user, I think how this works is that it will damage Para, but it doesn't seem to be like an AoE attack. It says in a target, and this is singular. It feels like it's not an AoE attack. You know what I mean? Maybe. Oh no, it is. It is an AoE. Sorry, my bad. On all enemies that had 85% chance to, yeah. So it's AoE attack. But I don't know if that means that if you target someone else, does Para get knocked out of stealth? I'm not sure how that mechanic works, because that could technically be really good for people who hide Landy behind an FCC as well. You know, pending that like she has guiding light, like does it knock Landy out? We'll see how that works, but right now this seems to be the thing that people are theory crafting, that oh, this is going to be like decent. One thing to note is that the 85% chance here is probably already taking into account the skill enhancement, because if you count the skill enhancement after the fact of the 85, you would go over 100%. So I'm assuming that 85 is the max. That's if you skill enhance this to +5. You acquire 2 souls from it, and you also have a cooldown of 4 turns. But when the caster, or when the target is granted a barrier, grants an extra turn to the caster. So I guess like if they have a barrier, what you could do, again, if he's pretty fast, like in an aggro comp, what you could do is go Desert Storm S2 and then S3 to push for your full team. Now the barrier is removed, right? And then so whatever heroes you're pushing are now gonna damage whoever's left over. So again, I think that in my mind, he's gonna play less like a Soul Weaver, maybe like more of like a, you know, the often forgotten Blaze Dingo, like a very aggressive type of Soul Weaver. So you're really talking about like a damage dealer. And he does have pretty high base speed, so I don't think it's out of the question. People can build 300 speed DJBs, and he doesn't really need damage, right? You could literally put your fastest gear on him if you're gonna bring him into these like barrier comps. So I think he has that potential, but he's definitely quote unquote nerfed in terms of being a Soul Weaver. That's my thought, at least. So we'll look at the Bastet Roar. So the Awakened version, before it had a 3-turn immunity, now it's reduced down to 2-turn immunity. In my opinion, not a big flaw in terms of like, if his role is now gonna be more aggressive comps, I think the 2-turn immunity is just fine. You just think about it like Ran, right? Ran can grant 2-turn immunity to the full team, and he's usually like the opener. So in terms of DJB, the 2-turn immunity should be good enough for a cleave comp, or at least a high speed aggro comp. The acquired souls is reduced now, and turn cooldown is also reduced, just because now I guess he doesn't have the heal, right, from the Everlasting Oasis. He doesn't have the heal on the S3 anymore, so he's not gonna really be, like I said, a Soul Weaver. So I don't know what kind of like artifact he should be on, to be honest. I don't even think it matters too much. Maybe I guess he wouldn't be on Warhorn, but like something along those lines where it's like kind of supportery, maybe. Maybe you will see him on Warhorn, but most likely people are not going to remove Warhorn from Emil Kauric. But he does seem to have some potential, and this will probably nail FCC into the grave in terms of the like a first pick knight. FCC is already kind of risky to pick really early now just because of Opsig's existence, but he could be that changer. So that's my thoughts for DJB. Now Fire Haste is an interesting one. In my opinion, this is like, you know, getting to the point where I'm kind of excited about it, but at the same time, it's like I'm not quite sure how he's going to be used. The S1 Envoy Scythe is right now, you know, not going to be all about elemental, earth elemental anymore. I think maybe Smilegate thinks that Haste is still a cool hero, which I think a lot of people think he is, but then he's not really used in any green like team comps anyway in terms of PvE. So it's just like, okay, maybe let's just rethink about him, maybe make him usable for PvP. I definitely say that his kit right now is shouting out more PvP, and it definitely has mechanics introduced where it's kind of needed in the meta. So like, you know, dispelling and defense break and all that stuff. But the 75% chance to steal 1 buff, that's kind of cool, I guess, but I don't know overall, like how that would be used on him. Like I'm just thinking about his survival. He is a thief. He does have pretty fast-based speed, but like where's the survival, right? I'm not quite sure how he's going to be used. Maybe RNL will be his play, because you kind of maybe want to have his S3 go off and then maybe into an S2 or something, because it's technically 2 AoEs. But Vampiric Seal is his S3. Attacks all enemies with Envoy Scythe, and then dispelling 2 buffs before 100% chance to inflict 2 bleeding for 2 turns. So the dispelling part is pretty good. I mean, you're dispelling technically like two buffs is pretty good in terms of yeah, just like most people have 2 buffs. It would probably think about like a barrier or a immunity or something like that, but at least you can cut through the immunity, especially if you got turn 1. The inflicting 2 bleeding, it does require a resistance check here though. It is 100%, but it inflicts 2 bleeding. It has an 85% chance to proc a defense break for 2 turns. So most of the time, like right now, the meta Soul Weavers can cleanse 2 debuffs, right? So if you cleanse the 2 bleeding, you can't cleanse the defense break, so that can leave the opponents vulnerable. That's where like this might be okay, but at the same time, again, it takes this proc and the guarantee you have to get the 2 bleed, and then you have a 15% chance for it not to even defense break. So that part gives me the kind of like not quite sure. And also he's a fire elemental hero, and he to dispel, again, he probably had to run effectiveness, so maybe you can't, I don't know, like maybe you can't run him in World Arena, but it just feels like he's so close to maybe being usable. He kind of reminds me of like Fire Araminta. Like on paper, I think like all the mechanics that the Fire Araminta had in terms of the previous buff, like it was like, okay, she's usable. And you can probably see her sort of in World Arena. I just don't know how she fit in the meta, and for him as well, I think even he has less of a chance to be in the meta, but maybe I'm not thinking clearly enough, so I'm not quite sure how I should feel about this one. Same thing here when the damage is, it is. More damage for fewer enemies on the field. This skill cannot trigger a counterattack. That's kind of nice as well. We see that being very, very useful on BBK, but of course she has the survival, she has the immortal that will allow her survival. He doesn't have that, right? So if you can't hide into stealth like a Wind Rider or something like that, like what is gonna do for your team on turn 1? If he's fast enough, maybe a cleave opener, but again, he has a lot of heroes to compete with in terms of like speedy openers. So I think overall he will just end up being kind of niche, and won't be that crazy. The damage is like increased, but yeah, I think that's pretty much all I can say about Haste. At least they're moving him towards a PvP direction, but whether or not he'll stick, I highly doubt it. So Choux is probably gonna be one of the ones that I think most obviously is very, very strong. And again, the idea for Choux is that, you know, I think she has a self crit rate imprint, which will make gearing or finding stats easier on her. And then she also has 10 speed EE, which means that a counter set on her is going to be her best in slot, especially that one of her EEs has a 40% after she uses Chop to trigger the S2 Floosh, and it can work on a counterattack. I've had Lost in World Arena versus Choux before, where I hit her, she countered, and then she went into Floosh. It's surprisingly high damage. At least the old Floosh was. There's some adjustments in the new one, but we'll see. The only difference here now will be a 20 soul burn on the S1 will grant an extra turn, so that's very, very scary, right? So if you consider that 40% proc for Floosh, if you're using that EE, like you can probably go S1, well, soul burn, S1, and then go into Floosh, and then do it again, and if you're lucky, you can get 2 Floosh. I'm pretty sure someone's deleted at that time. She is a HP scaling bruiser as well, so it gives her the innate survival that is really needed in World Arena. If you're squishy, you want stealth or barriers or something like that, but if you're like bulky like this and you still do damage, ooh, that's gonna be very scary. Attacks the enemy wildly with a spear and absorbs some of the damage back as health, so she has self-sustain on Floosh. It's really, really cool. Penetrate defense by up to 70%, but then reduced in damage. Okay, so that's Before, when Luna didn't have the defense pen on the S3, people were just like, oh, defense pen is going to be OP, and then when she got released, her mods were definitely lower to compensate it, even though defense pen is a higher value than the raw mod on Luna, and especially on I90 gear, like it's easier to get like really high defense. I think the 70% defense pen will definitely outweigh the damage decrease, but we have to see, because when they say damage decrease, we don't know how much it's decreased in terms of the damage mod. But I still think that she has really strong potential to be used now. In fact, I'm farming her right now in Banshee 13 one-shot for friendship farming. So when the caster is stacked, focus is 5, consumes all focus and increases damage dealt, and then resets the cooldown of Whoosh, so she'll always have it. Alright, so that's very, very cool. Damage dealt increases proportionally to caster's max health, like I said. Now the S3 Help Me Cream is a really bad name for the S3. If I pause, Help Me Cream, no, never mind. That doesn't really help the name sound any better. But anyways, Help Me Cream S3 freezes all enemies before attacking with Cream, and then increases the critical hit resistance, so crit rate debuff. You know, it's a 50-50 shot, but it's still like, you know, good to have. And for 2 turns, it grants the immunity for herself for 2 turns. So that's very, very nice. Damage dealt increases proportionally to caster's max health. It's an AoE attack, and it does AoE buffs, and she self buffs as well, right? So that's very, very nice. Gives her extra protection. When this skill is unavailable due to skill cooldown, after an ally except for the caster is attacked, has a 20% chance to counter attack. So this is like pretty nuts. So once you get her skill, her S3 is on cooldown, she basically has an innate Elbrus Ritual Sword. On top of the fact that, again, running on her on counter is probably going to be best in slot. If she S1s chops and has a 40% for Whoosh, you can imagine her damage output can be very, very nuts. I think out of any hero that is a single target Elbrus user right now, or sorry, not Elbrus user, but counter user, but has like a almost like a Green Charles threat. Actually, probably is better than a Green Charles threat. This is very, very crazy. With Snow Crystal also being buffed in this patch, there may be play with her using Snow Crystal. Who knows? I don't know though. I think right away, like, because she has anti-crit though, like something like Draco Plate might not be as valuable for her. But she is a warrior, so she has access to Sigurd's Scythe, maybe even Rimru's artifact, the magic mask, just for like random buffs or whatever to keep her surviving, because now she can heal, self-heal as well. So counter, maybe Sigurd, I think, to be honest. Yeah, so right now, like, with EEs, like I said, considering the EEs, considering the stats the EE brings, considering possibly self-imprints if you're lucky enough to have imprints, with all of the stuff, I think she's going to be the strongest hero in this patch. That's my opinion. Alencia as well. This is going to be a very, very interesting time. Of course, Alencia does have an EE. Her EE also gets modified in this when this patch is released, as you see down here. We'll talk about that. But I got excited to build Alencia. I was thinking maybe a lifesteal Alencia on pen set or immunity, just because like now she has the ability to be able to always guarantee that extra turn unless she has unbuffable on her, and she's also an injury damage dealer with the same amount of injury as a Ravi. She is a HP scaling bruiser with similar stats like a Ravi. I think she has a Fire Ken stats, if I remember correctly, or is it the other way around? I don't remember. But either way, she's still very, very strong. In terms of the buffs, I think someone like Choux is more obvious that she's really strong, but I definitely think that Alencia will have a play. Especially right now, DN and Crow are coming back into meta. DN predominantly, and Alencia was always a pretty decent hero into DN. I believe that back when Alencia was meta in World Arena, DN was also meta. So it's very interesting that now DN's back in the meta, Alencia could be back in the meta. So I'm very excited about how this is turning out. Damage dealt is increased on her base S1, the Eradicate, but everything else is the same. Now we go to Noble Blood though. At the start of the turn, has a 100% chance to grant Mind's Eye for the cast for 1 turn. If you guys don't remember Mind's Eye increases the effectiveness by 50%, but they changed it, whereas before it had ER. So you could have had a really, really strong, like, like right now a lot of like heroes are running like kind of a split like ER bruisers, like 100% ER. In my opinion, I would actually wish that they had kept the effect resistance portion, but I think they foresaw it as something that it might make Alencia too strong. So like chasing like up to 70 ER because you're granted 30% ER every single turn, unless again, like I said, she has unbuffable debuff. She might be too strong. So I think that this increase in effectiveness to 50 is definitely not as good as a 30-30, which you're technically getting 60% more stats instead of just a straight up 50%. But because she does defense break now, I mean she always did defense break, but the 50% now is going to be very nice, especially for people running about 100% ER. She's just going to get a free 50% effectiveness for that defense break. So at the start of turn, again, it grants you the Mind's Eye after using Eradicate, so the S1. When the caster is granted Mind's Eye, it activates Trample, so just like before, but now it inflicts injuries. The injury dealt is going to be 10% of the HP target every time the skill is used. That's very, very suppressing. It will suppress your opponents really quick. In fact, it's going to be very, very lethal, especially keeping in mind that she has 50% effectiveness, having the defense break possibility, 75%, onto the on the S1 there, into Trample. It's going to do a lot of damage and you're going to injury over time. So I think now she's going to be like back just when Crow and DN are coming back. I think she's going to be there just to suppress that meta as well. It's very, very nice to have. Trample's damage dealt is also decreased though, just because I think now, because you're guaranteed Mind's Eye, so you're always gonna, after Eradicate, you're always gonna do Trample. It kind of makes sense to decrease it, so in my opinion. But again, once they say damage dealt decreased, we have to keep ourselves skeptical in terms of like, okay, maybe she's not that OP, right? Like maybe it's so nerfed that she's unusable. But in my opinion, in my honest opinion, the 10% injury is why I think that she's gonna be really good again. Just because if you see A Robbie's like high amount of suppression, and Alencia's EE now going to allow for a heal. Even though we don't know how the heal is, like it probably won't be as good as A Robbie. And A Robbie, if she gets hit, she heals too. So she's gonna heal in two different areas. But yeah. So I was thinking lifesteal. You could probably think about counter Alencia as well. But speed set Alencia might just be a good way to go as well. Just keeping your turn cycle up. But in my opinion, Banshee gamers will go for Banshee sets. Wyvern gamers will go for Wyvern sets. Let's see here. Anything else? So Genesis. Increased combat readiness of the cast by 50%. This is an additional thing that she has. Makes her more aggro, but it will dispel all buffs, dispelling all buffs from your opponents, and also grant a defense buff for your whole team. So what she did before, this was already really packed, right? So what she did before this, like stripping all, and then defense buff for all, this was huge. Now we are still seeing defense buffs, of course, being really, really important in the meta. Steel Lilius's Vigor buff adds 30% defense, and then Pillis right now being heavily used, trying to provoke people into her, so she grants the full team defense buff. And so like I said, like with Alencia out now and being able to grant that CR boost up to 50%, so she can start trampling her opponent, this is definitely a hero that I definitely think that we should keep in mind. And also because she has EE, which is crit rate, it's also very high value to build her. I do have mine built already because of the free equip event which it's currently going on, but I'm basically just having the gear on her just when she gets buffed. She's already ready to be used. My Alencia actually looks pretty good just because ended up having some of these bruiser pieces that I've never used on anyone, because the bruises that require those pieces were just never meta anymore. So I'm glad I have her built. Alencia's Noble Blood EE is now going to be changed because obviously increasing the Mind's Eye doesn't matter anymore. She has 100% as long as she's not unbuffable on her turn. And then recovers the caster's health when using Eradicate. So this is the S1. it's going to heal on the S1, so counter might be pretty good if you're feeling lucky. And then amount recover increases proportion to the caster's max health. Again, we'll have to see what the healing mods are like on this. Like, it's gonna be like a Senya level. I would say Senya's heal was pretty disappointing, to be honest. Like, compared to what she needed to do. So a lot of people ended up going with the greater attack buff EE on Senya when Senya was like really good. We'll have to see. So I don't think she's gonna be an A Robbie, but obviously she's looking like she has A Robbie qualities with the 10% injury, and then now potentially with the EE, some of the self-sustain. So Wanderer's Silk looks pretty good right now. She is a ranger, and therefore she has the ability to use Guiding Light, which I think will be her best in slot based on what her new imprint releases, which is pretty crazy, and then also based on her kit. So I think she's gonna go into teams with like counter cleave or counter like insane, like, you know, really high speed, you know, Sid single target damage dealers, like Watcher Shuri, Sid, and all those type of players. I think she's gonna have that ability to deal with that because of Guiding Light, and then she has the speed imprint. So most likely after this buff, she's going to have to be in a deck in terms of anti-aggro, or even in a cleave comp. But you definitely want her built. Ideally, if she's triple S, you want those speed imprints. Is going to be really good. It has been a while since we've seen a speed imprint that is a 4-star speed imprint. This is 14 speed, so this meaning that it will be like a double slot instead of AoE. So AoE on a 4-star hero, Nat 4, would be 10 speed. 14 speed will be like Fire Shuri, Fire Siren. They have the 14 speed imprints, so it's really nice that she has this. We don't know what slots though, but that doesn't really matter, I suppose. If it overlaps with either Fire Siren or Fire Shuri, I think that's going to be like really good. In terms of the buff itself, in my opinion, all really usable. Basic shot, which you wouldn't be doing the S1 right away anyways, but it has a target debuff, which is really nice. Damage is increased. The damage dealt is different now. I think it's just compensating the speed, so maybe you don't need her to be that fast. Like, you don't need her to be a speed contest herself, but like I said, with the protection of Guiding Light, she's going to be a threat. Fires arrows at the enemy. This is focus fire, dispelling 1 buff, so that's very nice to have. Again, being turn 2 is really good because if you dispel 1 buff, it could be a breaker, right? It could be an attack down, or sorry, strip like an attack buff or something. It could strip any buff, and that's really good to have. When the caster has a buff, trigger dual attack from the ally with the highest attack. So again, if you are on Guiding Light and you are protected with Guiding Light, you're gonna have that buff, so you don't have to run her on immunity to get that buff. And getting that dual attack is really good. Damage dealt is also increased. Cooldown is increased though, because the damage is increased, but most likely you can run focus fire as your first turn. I guess you could do the S3 as well, but I don't know if it's necessary. I would probably run for the S2, depending on the circumstance. But the Shock Arrow Awakened after version, the damage is changed in terms of the raw damage. Soul Burn now ignores the effect resistance, so that's very good to have. 20 souls, so again, it can be in a cleave comp. Cleave comps usually they will ban Bellion and start, you know, packing in a couple soul holders. Edda, Sidon, Politis, all those are pretty popular. Angel of Light in some cases. Attacks enemies lightning arrows, inflicting silence, and then decrease attack for 2 turns. So that's like fully disabling, right? Fully disabling. They got attack down. They have silence, so they can't even do anything. And then decreases the combat range by 100%. Grants Berry to the caster for 2 turns. Berry strength proportional to caster's level. So I think situationally it could be S2 play, it could be S3 play. But if you have the barrier, you've been protected from anyone who has a, I don't know, I guess an AoE on the 2nd turn or something like that. But again, presuming that you will be running Guiding Light on her, I think she's going to be very nice to have. Mine is at 4-star or 5-star right now. Also farming her in the Banshee one-shot just to prepare to use her, because I think now in the World Arena meta, she's definitely going to be usable. Speed imprint plus the guiding light. The exclusive equipment is changed to modify based on what she's currently going to be doing, which is a totally brand new kit in my opinion. Yeah, it's actually she should be seen as the light in the light of like she's a totally new hero now, almost. So increases the effect chance of the basic shot for 15%. If I remember correctly, there are other EEs that are pretty good. That this might not be the go-to. I think I would go for something else, but I don't remember off the top of my head. So when I'm building her, I'll probably look into that. But there's probably going to be a very obvious one for the role that she's going to be covering. So Montmorancy or Angelic Montmorancy, so a Momo, I personally think that, like, I mean, it's an improvement, but I don't think that this is enough for players to be dusting her off to be used. We got minor improvements here. Sleep sorcery after you get 50% chance to put them to sleep. I mean, that's pretty good. A lot of these Soul Weavers now have some kind of crippling S1, so like a lot of stuns like May Chloe, DJB, like having sleep at 50%, the coin flip, pretty good, but may not be usable I think in World Arena in terms of like her overall buffs. Earnest Prayer Awakened, now flip the order. Instead of the original healing, then granting the immunity, then dispel. I guess there's too many unhealable heroes and then unbuffable. It just does make more sense to dispel first. In fact, like that should be the play on every single Soul Weaver right now that can cleanse. If they are inverted in terms of the heal and cleanse, are like, you know what I mean, like if it's inverted, it's old school and doesn't really work anymore, because of the prominent unbuffable debuff and then the non-healing, which is pretty big. So this makes it usable. It's just that it makes the skill usable, but it's just that it doesn't really, I don't think it makes her much more usable. Maybe in Guild War you'll see her again, because originally Momo used to be a really good cleanser because of the amount of effect resist she can have. But now Destina, assuming you have the max EE and even triple S, Destina has the most effect resistance out of all the Soul Weavers, at least in while her passive is up. So Destina right now is the most consistent, I would say the most reliable cleanser. Momo fell off, you know, pretty long ago, and I don't think this will put her back into the meta, or actually into the targets of people being like, maybe I should dust her off and make her work. She does get like some sort of benefit here. Instead of the extra 15% on the S1 rune is changed that she gets a 15% decreased damage, so it makes her tankier. It's not locked to crit damage, so it's any damage, right? True damage, anything like that, it will be decreased by 15%. So PvP oriented. So because this is like, you know, it's not an elite or boss monster, it's PvP oriented, and you can see the flip in the debuffs or the dispel and the heal. It is PvP oriented. It's just that the question is still there, is like, well, will she be used with all that's in, you know, what's available right now? I'm not super sure about this one. I definitely think that as long as people have Destina, she's going to be the more used cleanser healer combo. So yeah, I think that's it for Momo. Adventurer Roz, we're gonna take like Adventurer Roz because he's the one that really gets the big change, not regular Roz. So A Roz, having increased healing because of the Solitude rune, is basically applying this to the Purifying Flame, the S3. That sounds pretty good. I think A Roz could be coming back into the meta. Some people already use him currently, just because again he brings defense buff, immunity. He brings dual attack with the highest attacker on the team, guaranteed. You can soul burn, spam it. You can into a defense break. He still strips S1. So overall, he's a really good knight. I remember back when he was really meta. He fell off, but I think right now he is appropriate to be bringing back, especially with this new buff. I think it's really good for him. So it's an incremental buff. Nothing like, oh, he's gonna be meta, but I think definitely people will look into him because of his new mechanic. This is just a adjustment in the writing, I guess. The ally with the highest attack except for the caster. So no matter what, just somehow in case you are, you know, the highest attack, but I guess you have a Soul Weaver in the past, maybe he would have just not dragged anyone. You know what I mean? Like, the ally with the highest attack, if it's a Soul Weaver left, I don't know. I don't know what condition would make the change of this word, but I guess this just makes it really clear that you'll bring someone else into the dual attack, so that's good. But the Solitude rune after, this is the big one, of course. After the ally in the back row suffers single attack and damage suffered is 30% or more of max health, grants a barrier to the target for 2 turns. Barrier strength is equivalent to 40% of the caster's max health, so A-Roz's max health, which he has really high base HP. Usually on average 25,000 HP is what an A-Roz should be at, so that's a very fat barrier. Can only be activated once per battle though, so this means that like whoever you're putting back there, and you have to keep in mind it is a single target attack that triggers this, so it can't be AoE. It can't be like, you know, protect the Specteni. It won't work like T-Crozet, but it is kind of interesting with this barrier mechanic. Even though it can only be activated once per battle, like I said, it would be incremental buff. You're probably going to, like with DJB, with like, you know, people that can strip pretty easily, like a Bellion, you know, one single S1 can possibly strip the barrier. Like, it might not be that big of a deal, but I think if you're drafting him in a knight, a scenario where he's kind of like, you're kind of going aggro, he might work, right? So I think for a while people ran him on Aureus. I've seen Rise of Monarch A-Roz, which is really good too, because usually A-Roz is built pretty fast too, like at least 250 speed. So if he cycles quick enough, like he becomes a pretty good barrier barrier provider in terms of using Rise of Monarch. But now with this backline barrier thing, like, would that change him to be like a mainly Aureus, maybe Adamant Shield, or maybe he's still on Rise of Monarch? It would depend. And then like maybe situationally put the hero that needs this fat barrier at the back. I think in a offensive fight, in terms of like Guild War Arena or something like that, maybe it's easier because you could bait one of the backliners, you know, from single target damage or something, and then you protect him with this fat barrier. It could be a play. But in terms of like, it's basically an added mechanic into our people already who use A-Roz or want to use A-Roz in World Arena. So overall, I think it's a win no matter what. But whether or not like this is as big as like, let's say the Choux buff or the Alencia buff or the DJB buff, only time will tell. But I think it's enough to maybe consider him being reused or rethought in certain team comps. We might see something very interesting there. Okay, so Time Matter getting buffed, these artifacts. Time Matter getting buffed, increased damage basically is decreased overall, but you get the increased damage earlier. So you have it's not decreased overall, it's the same, but it's really kind of like the Wind Rider buff where they kind of split some of the attack up front before triggering the second condition, and then getting the max damage. So you have increased damage base no matter what, you have 12%, but then if the enemy is killed, it increases the next attack to 24%. This possibly, if you're using Vivian and Banshee one shot, I think possibly this will be your go-to artifact now. Before, for myself, I needed to run a Portrait of Savior for my Vivian, but that's probably just a gear issue. Time Matter would reduce the RNG into Banshee wave 2, but outside of like maybe farming, I don't know if I would use this in PvP. I can't think of a scenario where you would in PvP. So a buff nonetheless, but probably a good buff for something like PvE content, so to speak. So Snow Crystal, before it had effect resistance by 20, which is really odd. Even though it came with Choux, it was still very odd. But the critical hit resistance now is by 20. And so this would be really good, based on usually how these things work, like counter set with like a counter, like a counter passive or something like that. Usually it's not additive. It would count the counter set as a 30% roll, and if it doesn't roll it, it would check, like, let's say you have a Mort or now Green Armin, or Green Purgus, these self counter heroes, like it would be a double check, right? So I'm assuming the crit resistance here would be the same, like let's say you apply a DN anti-crit buff or Choux anti-crit buff. It would be a 50% check and then into a 20% check to see whether or not they crit. After the caster suffers a non-critical hit, increase the combat readiness by up to 16%. Now, I personally don't have Snow Crystal maxed. I do own it, but I don't have it maxed. And I mean, some people are saying that this could be good into Choux. But I'm gonna give credit to Tatsu. Tatsu was saying that Merciless Glutton on Choux is pretty good. I know when I was talking about Choux before, I wasn't sure like what artifact. Draco Plate would only serve like maybe half the purpose, since you probably want Choux to have her S3 up. You want the Elbrus thing, so like Draco Plate, if she has anti-crit, obviously Draco Plate's not gonna mitigate that damage. But that's where this kind of comes in, right? You get CR boost and Choux probably getting a lot of turns, so this could be very good on Choux. I kind of like the Merciless Glutton tech though, because Choux can output a lot of damage. Because my Snow Crystal is not maxed, I'm probably not going to put this on Choux. I'll probably end up with something like Merciless Glutton or something. Eternus, I like this buff as well. Before, increase the combat range of the caster by 6%, 12 when a debuffed ally except the caster starts a turn. This was like really ridiculous, right? If you think about the condition for this to actually work, like your cleanser, let's say for example, would have to be like behind the debuffed character, and then when the debuffed character starts to turn, you push up, but it's too late to cleanse, you know what I mean? So right now I think the change is exactly what it should have been, which is the more obvious way. Increase combat range of the caster by up to 14% when an ally has a debuff at the end of the enemy's turn. Can only be activated once per turn, but that at least makes some of the cleansing Soul Weavers able to actually skip the line and cleanse before the debuffed DPS or support or whoever gets a turn, right? So now Eternus, in my opinion, is a decent artifact, but I think the use the use here would have to be on. The other thing about it is almost kind of like a Dilibet, but at least it's better than a Dilibet, because it's just like any ally who is debuffed at the end of the enemy's turn, right? So as long as they apply a debuff at the end of their turn, this can be triggered. So that's very, very good. So like in terms of like Dilibet's, although she self cleanses, but she CR boosts the cut, right? So in the usual scenario where you use Dilibet, your team gets debuffed, she cleanses, she cuts, and then she S3 and then cleanses your entire team, right? So realistically, this is kind of what we want to see. I'm not sure who would run this though. Like Destina could probably work. I talked about that. You ideally want your Soul Weaver to have enough resistance to beat whatever debuff is coming for this to really, really work. And that Soul Weaver has to be a cleanser, obviously. Ideally a full cleanser. So someone like Destina I think really fits the bill. The issue is that like with Destina though, like if you're not running Bastion or you're not running Shamadra Staff, you gotta have like really good ER. And then this will remove any other long-term type of artifacts, because this is once per turn, and it also requires your enemy to constantly debuff, right? So it could be good. I'm not quite sure, but I think it on a Destina, I'm probably gonna think this on a Destina for my playstyle, and just build Destina on like maybe triple resist set or something, in order to like be that one despeller that I need for like a certain fight or something like that. So in my opinion, the Eternus buff is actually pretty good. Snow Crystal also good for what it is. It is pretty good. I think yeah, either that for Choux or someone else in the future. And then Time Matter is, to me, is still PvE PvE artifact. Anyways, that's my whole collective thoughts on all the heroes and all the artifact changes. Let me know in the comments down below who you're most excited about. Maybe I've missed something in terms of some heroes' usefulness or whatever. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. But for the video recording, I'm going to end this here. If you guys have Discord, check out the Discord server. Follow me on Twitter. Subscribe to YouTube if you haven't. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.